Hi everyone, this is Laura Puerto Real. I am going to be presenting to you today the radical Gloria Anzaldua, or as she calls herself, Chicana, Tejana, lesbian, dyke, feminist, writer, poet, cultural theorist. She does seem to have been all of those things. I'm going to start by talking to you about her early years. She was born on September 26th, 1942, in Raymondsville, Texas, which is a small town bordering Mexico. And there's many different cultures in that area, especially obviously Mexicans, and herself being a descendant of Mexicans. Her parents were migrant workers, so she had to move around to the different grape fields. That's what her parents were picking. Um, she had a very difficult life. At a very early age, at 3, she was diagnosed with an endocrine condition that caused her to begin getting her menstrual cycle early, and it stunted her growth. So by the age of 12, she had already stopped growing. And then her life was even harder after her father died. When she's 14, he dies, and she's now having to have the financial burden of helping out her family. And she had to work in the great fields through high school and college, full time. So, but she still did get her degree. 1962, she got her high school diploma from Edinburgh High School. 1968, she achieved her bachelor's in English, art, and secondary education from Pan American University, which is now University of Texas in Rio Grande Valley. 1972, she acquired her master's in English and education from University of Texas at Austin. 2005, she was working on her dissertation when she died in 2004. But in 2005, the University of California was nice enough to give her her PhD. Her work experience was mostly in education. She started as a bilingual preschool teacher. So for the most part that she was working in the K through 12 environment, she was working as a bilingual teacher, and then she was working as a special education teacher for mentally and emotionally handicapped students. She also worked as a liaison for the state of Indiana, between migrant farm workers, children, and the public schools. She then went on to higher education and started to teach at the University of Texas. She was teaching Chicano studies. And then her writing career actually started to take off when she wrote for a magazine, Tejidos. She wrote the article Tijueque in 1974. And that opened the door for her to lecture at other universities on Chicano studies and discrimination and creative writing. So she worked at a lot of universities, and she wrote a lot of books. Um, One of her most famous ones is the one that is included in Leonard, but you also have The Bridge Called My Back, writings by radical women of color. That was something that she was passionate about, because when she started writing, she noticed that there were very few writings from women of color. So writing with a group of women, the book "The Bridge Called My Back" was a big part of her life. She also wrote "Making Face, Making Soul," "The Bridge We Call Home," which is another radical um, book. So she mainly wrote radical things for adults, but she also wrote children's books. She wrote Prietita and the Ghost Woman, Friends from the Other Side. Prietita has a friend. So she was also trying to make sure that children had the opportunity of learning how to treat different people, learning how to deal with different races, since she was on the border of Mexico and Texas. She received many awards, especially for Borderlands, La Frontera. She was chosen by the Literary Journal as one of the 38 best books of 1987. It was chosen, and 100 best books of the century. She also received an award from Before Columbus Foundation American Book Award, the Sappho Award of Distinction, National Endowment of the Arts Fiction Award, and she also received the American Studies Association Lifetime Achievement Award. She's also recognized by the LGBT community as an icon, a historical icon for LGBT. She also received Lambda Lesbian Small Book Press. She leaves a very big legacy, especially um, at Duke University, as her dissertation that she was working on before she died, Light in the Dark, Luz en lo Oscuro, rewriting identity, spirituality, and reality. That manuscript is not just used by Duke, but it's also used by several other universities. And then the other legacies that she's left is that students can uh, get awards in her honor. You have the Gloria E. Anzaldua Distinguished Lecture Award, Gloria E. Anzaldua Award for Independent Scholars and Contingent Faculty, and then the Gloria E. Anzaldua Book Prize that the American Studies Association has. You also have the Society for the Study of Gloria. This society that sponsors a conference, El Mundo Zurdo, every 18 months. So her legacy lives on, and you can see it in every type of writing, especially at university level. The book from Lemert has The New Mestiza, or Borderlands, La Frontera, The New Mestiza. I understood it to have stories of how the Americas were populated and how the ancestors of the Aztecs are the ones that populated it, as it was found that about 20,000 grave sites were found in Texas. So mostly Southwest Texas is where you have the Aztec ancestors um, go, and then they went into Mexico, which is Mexico City today, and came back over to Southwest Texas. When the Spanish came and took over Mexico and pretty much did away with the Aztecs, most of the population was lost. But the Spanish mixed with the natives there and formed the mestizos. The mestizos and the Spanish and the North American from the other Texan natives that were there also mixed, and that formed what we know as Tejanos, which are natives to Texas. Um, it also talks about the conflicts between the Tejanos and the Gringos. Gringos to the Tejanos means the white settlers. It also is talking about the illegal crossings that happened in when Texas was still part of Mexico. The Americans were crossing over to the Texas Mexico border, and that caused many disruptions and eventually led to the Battle of the Alamo, which is very popular. And this piece, actually, I appreciate it a lot since I'm a history teacher and I have to teach about the Alamo in about a week. So I really did appreciate learning a little bit more about what happened with the Tejanos and the Gringos. But she also talks about the U.S. Mexican War, which, you know, the Battle of the Alamo was like the first thing that started to make it even worse of a conflict between the Tejanos and the Gringos, and that led to the U.S. Mexican War. And she explains how the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo actually shortchanged the Mexicans. when the war ended, when the U.S.-Mexican War ended, they signed this treaty, and the Americans promised that the 100,000 Mexicans that had land in Texas would be able to keep that land, and they were going to honor that and let them keep their land. But instead, what ended up happening is that the Texas border was extended by 100 miles, so they took even more land from the Mexicans than what was agreed upon. So on February 2nd, 1848, the Tejanos became foreigners in their own land. Obviously, what today is Texas for us, which eventually became part of the United States. It also talks about, she talks about Latina lesbians. She says that the biggest rebellion that Latina could have, or Hispanic could have, Hispanic woman could have, is to rebel by being a lesbian, or she said queer, um, because she notes that many Hispanic women are treated poorly, and they are suppressed and oppressed. They have to suppress their sexuality, and they have to keep it in the shadows. And she didn't want to keep it as a shadow, so she made a choice of becoming queer instead of just following the status quo. And also, she talks about the shadow beast, which is supposed to be letting out your sexuality, that would be the shadow beast. She also says that Hispanics or Latinos, as trying to protect Latino women, they actually hurt them, and they need to confront the ideas that oppress women in our culture. I did see some weaknesses. Um, I don't think she takes into account the perspective too much of the American perspective, or the Texan perspective. The Americans see it as they were crossing over the border because the Mexicans wanted people to move into that area of Southwest Texas, so that the Mexican government could still keep that land and protect them from the Apache Indians, because there were raids all over the place. So they, let Americans, the Mexican government let Americans come and settle in that area, since the Americans obviously wanted to expand with the westward expansion. So to stop, the Apache raids, the Americans did the Mexicans a favor, according to the Americans. That's part of the perspective. But she also calls Americans, or calls us Americans, imperialistic, and that's really why they went and started to settle into today Texas, was to eventually take over. Another weakness is the point of view of the Hispanic machista, the Hispanic man. He probably would not like um, what she talks about in here, about letting your shadow beast come out, as it is definitely not. Um, it's not seen as a good thing for Hispanics. But also the Catholic Church, it condones homosexuality, so she's not taking, she's not putting that into uh, this perspective. But obviously, it's her perspective, so that's how she feels about sexuality, and about the taking over Mexican land, and our culture, our Hispanic culture. I do see strengths. I see actually probably more strengths than I do weaknesses. Again, I'm a history teacher, so I definitely appreciate the her getting into the accounts of the origins of the indigenous people of the Americas, especially how they crossed over the Bering Strait and came over to the Americas and started living in Southwest the United States today, or Mexico back then. Not back then, but um, that time period. Most of those natives that were there, and how they went to Mexico City, and then the Spanish came and take over, and they go ahead and mix and have the new race that had never been seen before, that actually could withstand all the diseases that the Spanish conquistadores brought over. Also, I see that she explains in detail the Tejanos and Gringos relationship. It does again make me appreciate what they did go through, with the border being extended, and how the Mexican War and the Treaty of Guadalupe ended up, leaving the Mexicans out of their own lands. I also definitely appreciate the fact that she's bringing in the traditional Latin view of sexuality, and women's roles, and how men, Hispanic men, see us as burras, okay, which mean donkeys, female donkeys, like we don't know anything. And that is something that I can definitely relate to. I see that with many Hispanic women. I do want to say about her death. She died at 61 from complications of diabetes in Santa Cruz, California, on May 15th, 2004. Um, uh, on her 75th birthday, Google was nice enough to do this um, doodle, as they call it, of Anzaldua for her 75th birthday. Also, in that same spirit, there was an anthology um, made with contributions by over 50 of today's poets. In 2017, it was all about her writings, and how she's influenced society today. And I will, hopefully I will read that soon. I do see why she says that she's Chicana, Tejana, lesbian, dyke, feminist, writer, poet, cultural theorist. I did see all of that in her, and she's had some implication in my own life. I don't seem to like to talk about things that have to do with sexuality, so I had to be thinking about it when I was doing the presentation. So she made me think about, what it is that how women are treated in our culture in that perspective. So there's Gloria Anzaldua for you.